was younger, I collected football cards. I had books upon books upon books of football cards. And I loved it. And one time I was going through my catalog of football cards when I was a kid, and all of a sudden I realized I had a special one, a diamond in the rough. I had a Dan Marino rookie card. So you better believe it. As soon as I realized I had that, I ran to the local card store to see what can I get for this. And unfortunately, I didn't always take the best care of my cards, and it was a little bent up in the corner, and that devalues it. But I took it to the card store and showed the guy there, and he told me that the rookie card I had, even with the bent up corner, was worth $80. You better, I believe, I cashed it in. Cha-ching, cha-ching. I was flying over. I was excited. I don't know what I did with those $80, but I had $80. You know, it's crazy because people have said value and worth is based upon the eye of the beholder. You know, for some, those cards we collect are the most valuable things, the most amazing things this world has ever seen. For others, it's a picture on cardstock, right? That's all it is. What's the big deal? Can I ask you a question? When you look in the mirror, what do you see? What do you see when you look in the mirror at yourself? You know, I think we struggle, and we all do. Let's just be honest with each other. We all struggle with trying to find our value and our self-worth. We're kind of all there, aren't we? We're trying to figure out where we belong, where we fit in, and we try to figure out what makes us valuable. I think before we can really even move on, we need to define what that is. What makes you valuable? Because we live in a world that bases our value on how we look or what we do. You're not valuable unless you're the prettiest in town or you're the most bulked up in town. Forget me then, right? You're not valuable unless you've achieved the most that this world can provide. And we've been led to believe the lie of this world that our value is based upon how we look and what we achieve. And that's just bogus. That's just bogus. How you look and what you achieve in this world has nothing to do with your worth. Nothing whatsoever. But that's the way the world leads us. That's what the world teaches us. You see, our value is found where we belong, not what we do. This is because we find our value based upon our surroundings. We all do. Our value and what we find our self-worth is found where we surround ourselves with. We talked about this last week, but let me refocus on that a little bit. Our value is found by our surroundings, and who you surround yourself with matters. It matters, and it impacts how you view yourself and how you value yourself. Your value of yourself is based upon what you surround yourself with. It just is. It is for all of us. And the problem is this: we devalue ourselves when we struggle with knowing where we belong. And if you're like me, we're all in the same boat. We're on this we're just a bunch of ragamuffins trying to get through this world, trying to figure out, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? Where's my value? Where's my worth? And here we are. We're all kind of going in this. Have you ever felt out of place? Have you ever just struggled like, I just don't fit in? And I don't know where I fit in. Let's just be real, we've all been there. We've all been there. And we all struggle with that. Before we move forward, let's take a step back and dialogue about this and build a framework of the reality of our belonging, of where we belong. Because our belongings are not based upon our possessions, but it's based upon our relationships, the people to whom we belong and to who belong to us. You know, in his book, Soul Strength, Dr. Alan Algram highlights the 4 different spheres of relationships that we find ourselves within. And we all kind of journey through these 4 spheres of relationships. There's the public sphere. That's like the coffee shop you go to. That's the place you hang out. That's your school. That's hanging out in the church lobby, things like that. It's basically surface level relationships relationships. You don't really know the people, but you're familiar with the faces. That's kind of the public sphere. And we all find ourselves in different public spheres of our life. The other sphere is the social sphere. We kind of hang out in our social media world, and this is kind of where we lay at. The social sphere is where you have more friendly gatherings. It's your small groups. It's your classes. It's not close, intense gatherings, but it's enough to get to this more surface level. You're having laughs. You're joking off. You're being weird. You're being goofy. It's just social. But everything's on the surface level. The next sphere is taking a step down is your personal sphere. This is when I hang out with people at a coffee shop or going out to eat with somebody, where the conversation flows a little bit more, where you share and you pass along and you receive more information about about each other. You may go in depth from time to time, but not necessarily. Most of this is just kind of more information sharing and passing and just enjoying each other's company. But then there's the intimate sphere. This is not a lot of people in our life. This is where the in-depth stuff happens. The real truth is shared, where you become the most vulnerable. This is my heart. This is what's going on in my life. And in our journey, in our spheres of life, we all have different groups of people that sit around the table of our life. So the question is, who's around your table? I think it's important for us to have people in all different spheres. But who's around your table makes a significant impact on who you are. And here's the reality. We're pretty blessed with relationships. I know sometimes because we struggle emotionally and internally, we don't see it, and we kind of put blinders on. But let's just be honest, we're all really blessed with relationships in our life, more than sometimes we even realize. But we also need to be mindful of who is at our table, who are we gathering around, because the company that we keep influences us. That's what we talked about last week. It's what Paul wrote about in 2 Corinthians, how our company affects who we are. It affects who we are. You know what they call that? It's called the sociology of desire. We all deal with it. We all wrestle with it. We all have to walk through it. What that means is this: we all tend to gravitate towards the tastes, the preferences, the values, the attitudes of those that we surround ourselves with. Every one of us. We become like what we surround ourselves with. Don't believe me? Just take a step back and watch yourself. Or if you don't want to watch yourself, watch people. We all do it. We become like what we surround ourselves with. We all take the clues from those that are at our table. And often, without even realizing it, we adapt and we assimilate what we see in them or hear from them into our life. That's the sociology of desire. Our surroundings impact our sense of belonging that adjust how we view and value ourselves. How we value ourselves is based upon where we find ourselves, where we belong. To take this a step further, the University of Harvard had a fascinating study that provided some eye-opening realities on the relationship with us and church. You see, we live in a world that's saying church is a bad thing, don't be in church, don't, all this different stuff. But in Harvard, the Podunk School, Harvard, their study and their program, the Human Flourishing Program, did this study. And their study showed the effects of how religion impacts health and happiness. And in their study, they revealed children who were raised in a religious environment had better protection from what they call the big three: depression, substance abuse, and risky behavior. Here's some findings from their study. They found that children who attended church, who attended religious activities, were 12% less likely to suffer from depression. Those who attended church were 33% less likely to use drugs. They were 18% more likely to report high levels of happiness. You want to find more happiness? Go to church. They were 87% more likely to have high levels of forgiveness in their life. You know what all this is showing and reveals? Go to church. Going to church should be an important priority of our regular weekly activities. Studies show the more we are involved with church, the more happy we are, the more focused we are, the more life rewarding we find in our life, and the less likely we are to making bad choices that bring bad consequences into our life. Seems like someone should have written that in the Bible. Maybe they did. That's why it's so important, guys. And just talk to the parents really quickly. We're allowing the world to make other things the priorities of our children when it should be the church. Not their sports, not their music, and don't send lightning on me, not their education. All that is secondary to church. Everything. And when we get our priorities mixed up, the studies show the problems we tend to have internally. And what it does, make church a priority in your home. Attending weekly services, getting your kids involved with Impact Kids, getting your students involved with Impact Students on Sunday night. You will not regret that choice in your life. You will not. Make it a priority. Going on back to the study, you know what else it showed? Fascinating stuff. The study revealed that those who pray and meditate regularly are 30% less likely to start having sex at a young age, are 40% less likely to have an STD, are 38% more likely to volunteer in their community. And hear this, those who pray regularly and meditate regularly are 47% more likely to have a sense of mission and purpose in their life. Wow. You know what that's telling me? At home, in the privacy of your own house, in those walls where no one else really knows what happens in those walls. Families, make it a daily priority that you're praying and reading the Bible together. It matters. It matters. Being in his presence makes a significant difference that even Harvard's recognizing. It matters. Don't miss that. It's all about whose presence are you in? Whose presence are you in? It's where we belong. It's where we find our value and our worth. And when we devalue ourselves, it impacts how we view ourselves and how we define ourselves and how we think, and it all goes back to, where do you belong? And this is where we find the person we're talking about today. This woman who's highlighted in Hebrews chapter 11 seems like an unlikely person to highlight in the story. I mean, you think about, there could be many other biblical greats, men and women, who could have been highlighted. And then there is this woman who we really, honestly, don't know much about. We really don't know much about her achievements based upon one small little chapter in the Bible. In this verse, in Hebrews 11. But we see a woman who I think was walking a journey that we all walk. And that was walking a walk of trying to figure out, where do I belong? What's my value? What's my worth? Where am I finding that? Her name was Rahab. And in Hebrews 11, verse 31, this is all that's written about her. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. That's it. That and what we see in Joshua 2, which tells her story, and I encourage you to go read there because we're going to hit some key points in her story, but not dig deep into it. I encourage you to read her story in Joshua 2. But there's really only 3 basic facts we know about Rahab from Hebrews and from Joshua 2. The first is this. She was from Jericho. So why does that matter? Is because Jericho was a land that was a land of all these competing gods and all these competing voices and opinions and worldviews that were all telling them, you got to live this way, be this, do that in order to find wholeness in your life. And when you be this, do that, and are this person, then you'll be happy, then you'll be good, you'll have everything you could ever imagine. And as you see through her story, she was starting to realize, a lot of promises, nothing really coming through. That's what we know. She was from Jericho. Secondly, she was a prostitute. Her role and her place was completely devalued. Take it a step further. She was a person who found her value on a world that completely took advantage of her. Kind of feel that way? Now, I'm not saying you're a prostitute, but hear me. In a lot of ways, we're no different than Rahab, because we try to find our value based upon all the promises that the world gives to us, and all we find is a world that takes advantage of us. And there we try to find our value and our self-worth. And she was just left disappointed. And I think many of us are too. Many of us are in that same place, in a world that says, I have all this stuff for you if you just be this. And then before you know it, the world's lying and just taking advantage of me, and I feel a lot worse than I ever did before. And many of us sit in that same spot, and that's where she was. The third thing we know about Rahab is that the Bible says she lived on the city wall. You know why that was important? Because all the important and elite people lived in the center of the town on the hill. The more important you were, the more center of town you lived. The least important you were in the society, the more outer of the walls you lived. So in other words, living on the wall, you were a nothing in their city. You were completely devalued. Why? Because that meant if enemy attacks, guess who's getting killed first? Those people. Guess who's getting protected? The important people. Do you ever feel like that? I don't live there. I'm not as good as them in that part of town, in that neighborhood where they are. And then we begin to feel average and least important. Like we talked about a few weeks ago, we feel very other than. And here we see this woman who lived in Jericho with all these competing voices, do this, be happy, be happy, be happy, go this way, that were letting her down. She found her value based upon how the world took advantage of her, and she lived on the outer walls, which means she was completely devalued and very unimportant in her city. And there she sat, a woman, as you read her story, realizing there's got to be something more. There has to be something more to this. This can't be it. This can't be everything. And I wonder how many of us sit in that spot. I bet it's safe to assume that some of you are sitting in that spot right now. You're thinking the same thing that Rahab was thinking. There's got to be more to this. Is this really it? Is this really my value? Is this my worth? Can I just talk to you, say something to you for a moment? If that's you, you are valuable. You are loved. Stop basing your value and on your worth on what the world's telling you, because they're going to let you down. Find your value and worth on the God who created you, who loves you, who values you. That's Rahab's story. As we continue on, she was in a world of all these competing voices, and there were so many promises, but there was no follow through. It was all broken and empty promises that the world was giving to her. And then the spies showed up. You can read about this, like I said, in Joshua chapter 2. But the spies, they were from Israel. And at this time in history, what was happening was Israel was on the way to the promised land. And God was working in them in many ways. They were winning tremendous battles. And amazing ways of 300 men against 3,000 men going into battle with no weapons whatsoever, but somehow they defeat the mightiest of enemies. And you better believe it that every single nation was beginning to talk about, have you heard about the people in Israel? Have you heard about the people in Israel? Have you heard about the God they serve? This is crazy. Their God keeps showing up. Our gods, they're not doing nothing. And then these spies showed up. And all of a sudden, it started to get through Jericho. There's Israel spies here. We're next. Oh, no. And guess where they showed up? Rahab's house. It's amazing how God works because we think we feel very devalued and we're not worth anything, but God shows up in the least likely spaces, in the least likely of ways to help us to realize you matter to the story. And I think God was showing up right there to Rahab to tell her, you matter to my story of what I'm going to do in this world. You matter. And there the spies were sitting in her living room. She was making them a cup of coffee, maybe making some biscuits and gravy. I don't know what they make over there, right? She was being very hospitable. And she began to say, I know the stories. I heard about your God. I heard how your God comes through, and my God's always failed me. I heard how your God watches over you and takes care of you, and I feel like I have no place to go. And there they were in this dialogue. In Joshua chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, we pick it up. She says, when we heard of it, we heard of all that you were doing and how what God was doing through you in these battles. Our hearts melted in fear and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God, listen to this, is God in heaven above and on the earth. There she realized there's something different about the God you serve. There's something different there. Now then, please swear to me, she said, by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sister, and all who belong to them, and you will save us from death. Just like Noah, who we talked about previously, she was taking steps. Why? To protect her family from what was going on in the world around her. Rahab realized the gods of her culture were not working out. She realized that everything her world was telling her to do to be happy and to be good and find value was not doing what they said they were going to do. It was all broken promises. And she was pondering, maybe this is not where I belong. Jericho might be where I live, but it's not my home. That's what she began to realize. She saw how the God of the Israelites came through. You know, you go back into Genesis, we see the stories of all the people of Israel, how God saved them and brought them out of Egypt and did all these amazing things, and God was always taking care of him. And then the people called him in Genesis, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. And then from that point on, people in all nations around the world started to realize the God of Israel, Jehovah, he always provides. He always says what he says he's going to do. He always comes through the way he says he's going to come through. This world I'm living in, these gods, broken promise after broken promise. And here I still sit. And Rahab realized there's something different here that I want. I don't belong where I'm at. I belong with him. I belong with him because there is my purpose. There is my value. There is my worth. Not here on the city wall, on the other side of town, where everybody just takes advantage of me. And there she was. And this is our struggle. This is our struggle. At some point, we're in this rat race of life trying to figure out where our value and our worth, when it really boils down to where we belong. And at some point, like Rahab, we got to realize we might live in this world, but this is not our home. It's not. We all wrestle with so much eternal trauma. We all do. And some of you sitting here watching online, I know the reality of depression, the reality of brokenness that may be in your life. The reality of confusion of where do I fit in or where do I belong, and all this emotional trauma and stress that every one of us at some level struggles with emotional stress and trauma in some way. Maybe we don't like to talk about it, but we do. I do. Just be real with it. And we try to fit in this world that tells us we'll be valued and worth something based upon their criteria, which really comes down to how you look and what you achieve. And through all these promises, we realize they're just broken promises. And it's just a world that takes more advantage, more advantage, more advantage. At some point, we need to realize, like Rahab, I don't belong here. Maybe I'm struggling with what's going on in my heart because I have to come to terms with this world's not my home. I may live here right now, but it's not where I belong. It's not where I belong. There's something more. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul put it this way in Philippians chapter 3, verse 20. He says, our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ. You see, our citizenship is the place where we belong, where we identify ourselves in, and ultimately where we find our value. And here's the problem I think we all live in and wrestle with. We try to find our value based upon the world that we live in. And that's why the world has become so divided and broken. Well, I'm an American. I'm from France. What do you call it? Francais, Frenchy people, right? French. Or I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat. We try so hard to identify ourselves where we feel we belong or where we fit in. And guess what? It's never been to be there. That's where it's not intended to be. We're not of this world. And the more we try to identify ourselves with the world we live in, the more we're disappointed and broken. Because this world is not our home. This world is not our home. There's something more. There's something beyond here. Rahab, she realized her value was not in her culture and what her culture was telling her. She was realizing her gods were failing her, that those around her were letting her down and just taking advantage of her. They failed to show her what true value and worth was all about. They failed to come through. And she saw a God in the Israelites' God who was always coming through. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. And it was in that moment, with a spy sitting on her couch in her living room, when she realized where she belonged. I belong with your God. He's the one who sees me for who I am, not based upon how I look or what I do for him. My value is in him. You see, please understand something. Our value is found when we realize where we belong, not on what we do. Never has, never will be. Are you wondering? Kind of wandering through this world, trying to figure out what your worth is, where you fit in, trying to find your place, trying to find your value? Can I just tell you? Let me reiterate it for you. Your value will never be about how you look or what you do. Don't buy into the world's junk. Your value is found in the God who loves you, who created you, and who sacrificed himself for you. That's where your value is and always has been. So let me just speak to some of you guys because someone needs to hear this. You are valuable. You are loved. You are cared for by a God who died for you. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever let the world tell you something different. Don't ever let the world pull you down. Psalm 139 tells us even a step further. It says there, for you were created in my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. You know what this verse tells us? As we build upon the reality of where we belong and where we find our value, not only do you belong in Christ, not only does he have tremendous value for you, but he has plans and a purpose for you. Plans to prosper you in his name, not to take advantage of you like the world does. This world values you based upon what you do. God values you based upon who you are and your heart. Rahab lived on the outer wall and she was devalued by her hometown. And God looks through all that junk and sees you. He sees you. It's kind of like a mom. You know what's so awesome about moms? It's how much they just love their kids. It doesn't matter what you do. You just got to be you. They love you. You know, so often my family will go to sports games or music concerts, things like that, and we see our boys perform. And you know the beauty about moms? They don't care if you make 1,000 goals or miss every shot. They don't care if you sing the best or you sing off key every note. They're out there saying, look at my boy, look at my girl, look how awesome they are. Why? Because they don't care about what we achieve. They care about you. You, just being you. And Jehovah Jireh, the God I serve, is exactly the same. He looks through all the junk that the world tries to feed us. The way the world tries to tell us how we are valued and worth and loved. And he says, no. I don't care if you make 1,000 goals or miss every shot. I don't care if you sing like Dale or sing like Bill. I don't care if you're the CEO of the biggest company in the world or you're flipping burgers. I love you. You are my child. That's all I need. And I'm writing your story. You know, we may think we're insignificant, but God has special plans. Rahab, her whole story was just that. All she did was let the spies come into her house, gave them some coffee, some who knows what else, hung out with them in her living room, realized, wait a minute, I belong with your God, not where I'm at right now. And then she decided, when she realized her value, it led her to action. And it was in that moment that she said, you know what? I'm going to help you. As long as you save my family. Can you protect my family? If I get out of this town safely. And he gave her a promise. And she made up stories when the officials of Jericho came out looking for them, and she snuck them out in the middle of the night over the wall. And they came back and they held their end of the bargain and protected her while the rest of the city was destroyed. And there she found, through her value and her worth, based upon where she belonged, through all that, she found her significance. She found her significance. Can I just tell you something? God's writing your story. Stop trying to be right. Stop trying to write your own story. I'm a control freak, and I try to write my own story all the time. Okay, this is how things should go. This is what I should be doing. This is how life should work out. And I'm trying to write my own story, and guess what? I mess it up all the time. But when I take a step back and just realize, wait a minute, I belong in Christ. I just need to be in his presence. Because when I try to write my own story, you know what tends to happen? I get so focused on trying to write my story that I forget about hanging with God. That's the problem. When God's saying, stop trying to write your story and just be with me, who is the developer of your story. And that's where it's all found. When I say, okay, Bill, I'm going to stop writing my story. I'm just going to hang out with God and let him write my story. He opens up doors that you would never believe possible. And he makes this girl who the world would say, you're nothing. He says, no, she's something because she's my child. He says that about you too. The world may say you're nothing, but God says, no, 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 no. This is my child. They're something. And I have a story for them. Let God write your story. Psalm 37 says this, trust in the Lord and do good and dwell in the land and enjoy safe pastures. Take delight in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. You know, the desires of your heart is found when you connect your heart to God. Why? Because we often link what makes us happy based upon who we surround ourselves in the world, and it's always letting us down. But God says, no, you want to find your true happiness, your true delight? Connect with me. And there you'll find joy that you never could have imagined. That's what that verse says. And the more we find ourselves in his presence, as the Psalm 37 says, dwelling in him, the more we find our value, our worth, and our significance. Rahab did that. She found who she was in the presence of the God of Israel, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. She became someone that was highlighted in Hebrews 11, the Faith Hall of Fame. She also found herself, if you read Matthew chapter 1, she found herself in the lineage of the Messiah. She found significance in herself based upon where she belonged. That's all she did. I may live in Jericho, but it's not my home. I want to be in the presence of God, the God, Jehovah Jireh. And when she found where she belonged, this led to her doing something significant. She helped the spies, and her obedience offered her significant rewards. Hear this, my friends. You see, our value is found in the God who loves us and died for us. Our rewards are found in our obedience towards him. That's the path Rahab took. She found her value in God, which opened up her faith towards him, which led to her obedience to him, and there she found the rewards. And that's our path too. We find our value in him because he created you. We find the rewards from him when we walk with him. And even the smallest of the deeds of obedience have significant value. Don't ever let other people lead you to believe that what you do doesn't matter or is less important of that next person. It's not. Everyone is just as valuable as the next person. I don't care what role you have in the church, what role you have in that company. That company is nothing without you. You are valued. And faith leads us to that action. This all leads us to what's our next step. You know, I hope that if you're struggling with your worth and your value, you realize that you are a child of God, and you will find your value when you make a focus of being in his presence, your daily encounters, going to church. That's where you find your value and your worth. And then allow that to lead you to obedience that opens up the doors to rewards that you could never imagine. Not physical rewards, maybe some of those, but more importantly, the spiritual, internal rewards that he gives. You'll be blown away the more you just be in his presence and allow his presence to lead you towards obedience. And he'll open up all the doors. So what's your next step? Do you need to make church more of a habit in your life? Do you need your kids to get plugged into Impact Kids or Impact Students? Do you need to figure out a way to make a daily habit in your home that you're going to do encounters, you're going to pray together and read together and get into the Bible as a family together? What's your next step? Take the steps to make God's presence in your life more of a regular occurrence and walk with him and see the doors that he opens up. He's got something significant to you because he is writing your story.